Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite dark romances. So in my last recommendations video, I told you guys all about my 6 favorite soft romances. And like, soft's great, soft's fine, but I'm a dark ass bitch and I like dark romances. They are some of my favorite to read. So without further ado, let's get into it. My first recommendation for you guys is The Unrequited by Saffron A. Kent, and we're off to a Lana Del Rey stalker sad white girl bang. This book is so good and so twisted and so taboo that I must insist that you listen to the Born to Die album by Lana Del Rey as you read this book. Like, it is essential listening, and I believe Layla talks about the album in the book, so it's just perfection. So what is this book about? Imagine that Joe from Caroline Kepnes's You had a little sister. That would be our main character, Layla. So Layla has been obsessed with the same guy for a really long time, and as readers, we are not supposed to know why. Layla ends up going to a new college to kind of escape her past and escape her stalking tendencies, but oh no, Layla ends up stalking a different guy instead, and this time it is her college professor. Married college professor. The book is about her trying to get closer to her professor under the guise of like tutelage. She's like, oh yeah, like I want to be a poet, I want to be a writer, and her whole plan all along is to get really close to her professor and steal him away from his wife. There are a few reasons why I enjoyed this so much, but I'm just going to give you the main 2. The first one is the chilly atmospheric setting that this book had really just suited the dark stalker tendencies of Layla. It was set in Connecticut in the fall, and even though I was on a sunny beach when I read this book, I felt like I was in Connecticut. And we also don't know who to root for. Do we root for Layla? Do we root for the wife? Do we root for this professor to, I don't know, come to his senses and realize that he's being stalked? I like that question's never really answered. And I think of all of the books that I'm going to mention on this list, this one is by far the most unique. I've not read anything even remotely similar to this in the romance genre, so I would definitely give it a try. Trigger warnings for cheating, suicide attempt, stalking, and very, very questionable mental health rep. That's just something to be aware of. I'm going to be doing trigger warnings for all of these books, just FYI. The next book on my list is Kill Switch by Penelope Douglas. Hello, hate to love goodness. No, not the story itself. I mean my attitude towards the main character, Damon. This is the 3rd book in a series of standalone novels by Penelope Douglas, and this is Damon's story. He is one of 4 men that this series is going to be about. In the first 2 books, Damon is the villain of the story, and in the 3rd book, we're getting more of a glimpse into his past and understanding more about his villainous tendencies. I can't really go into the detail of the plot on this series because while it is a series of standalone novels, I think the individual stories hold up best when you know what has come before it. You kind of get to know the characters a little bit more before you read their individual romances. So I'm not going to go into the plot of this specific book, but the series as a whole is about a quartet of gentlemen, basketball players, who fuck shit up. They're kind of hoodlums, and essentially 3 of the 4 dudes go to prison for a couple of years. Once they get out, they want to seek revenge on whoever has done them wrong in the past and who has supposedly had a part in them going to prison in the first place. So each book is about each individual guy, their love interest, who for some reason always ends up having a part to play in the reason that these guys went to prison. But anyway, that's basically what the series is about. It is sort of new adult, but it is post-high school and honestly post-college. So I will say the romance in this book in and of itself is not inherently dark. There are not the same dark themes that I feel like run in some of these other books that we're getting into. There's no real psychological abuse of either of the main characters towards each other or in the actual present of the book. However, there are flashbacks to Damon's past, which it's traumatic. He has suffered so much abuse, so many hardships, and I think the overall tone and feeling of the book is especially dark, even though this is considered like a contemporary new adult romance. Like I said, these flashbacks are incredibly haunting and give you the sense of hopelessness that definitely would not help you if you were currently depressed. So I would say if you're depressed, maybe stay away from this series. But the transformation of Damon from a character that I absolutely loathed into a character that I absolutely loved, I think is so rare in books, and whenever an author is able to successfully do that, it's something that I have to recommend to you guys because it's just fun. So like I previously mentioned, trigger warnings for incest, abuse, flashbacks of past trauma, and potential dubious consent, although I can't think of any particular instance, but that's pretty common in Penelope Douglas's books. Oh, and also there's a threesome. The next books on my list are a duology, and it's the Scarlet Scars duology by J.M. Darhauer, Menace, and Grievous. Be still, my heart, for I am head over heels with Lorenzo Gambini. This is a classic mafia-style romance with an incredibly well-done humorous twist. The story is about a one-eyed mob boss named Lorenzo who gets pickpocketed by a sex worker named Morgan. Morgan has a past she's trying to run away from. Lorenzo's trying to get his revenge, as most mob bosses do, and lo and behold, there is a way that they can help each other out. Much like Kill Switch, I feel like this book takes a classic trope, a mafia romance, and puts a really fresh and exciting spin on it, and I'll tell you why. First, there's dual points of view. And let me tell you, Lorenzo is funny as fuck. If you don't like wisecrackers, you're probably not going to like this. And if you're going into this expecting it to be a typical rough and tumble mafia romance with like a really annoying dude bro alpha male, like this is not it. He is funny. He makes light of his situation in life, the fact that he has one eye. And I also like that I feel like the representation is pretty good. He has to shoot people, right, as like a mob boss, but obviously having one eye messes with your depth perception, and that's something that plays into the book and ends up being kind of a humorous, I don't know, thing that happens. So I loved the humor. I liked the representation. That was really great. Number 2, sex positive prostitute. We love this. Anytime there is any sort of sex work in a lot of mafia romances, or really any romances, it is looked down on. And in this case, Morgan likes her work. She does not feel ashamed of it. And there's a part in the book where Morgan and Lorenzo have an interaction where they kind of discuss sex workers and the respect that they deserve and sort of the misogyny of the culture of the mafia. And I was like, is this really happening in a mafia romance? It was so awesome, so feminist, and so well done. And third, the plot was not too elaborate. And you're probably like, shouldn't the plot be like good? And that's the thing. I don't think elaborate and good necessarily go hand in hand in a mafia romance. I feel like too often we get these double-crossed, shoot 'em up sort of plots, and I end up not giving a fuck. In this book, I think the plot sort of takes a backseat to the romance, but it's still compelling enough to drive the story forward and kind of justify the fact that there are 2 books in the series. And I will say that pretty much all of the positive things that I have to say about the first book carry on into the second book. Nothing dragged on. I really enjoyed the conclusion, and it felt very realistic given the characters and where they had come from. For this book, just trigger warnings for past assault and past trauma that is discussed. Another one of my favorite duologies is the Written with Regret duology by Ali Martinez. Psychological thriller fans, this one's for you. Or maybe not. If you have taste, I don't really know, judge for yourself. This book is about a girl who ends up getting shot at a mall when she's a kid and gets saved by this guy who's about 15 at the time. Years later, she can't stop thinking about him, so instead of just fondly remembering him, she decides to track him down, figure out who he is, sleep with him, and then she ends up getting impregnated and leaves her baby on his doorstep. 4 years after the abandonment, homegirl's back and she wants to meet her kid. But things are more complicated than they seem. So going into this book, I really had no clue what to expect. It felt a lot like other indie romances that I had read in that there's a single dad, or there is this reason these characters have some sort of connection, like years down the road, you know, they like met once and then they meet up again. But in this case, it's like, how are we going to sympathize with the female protagonist when she has done this sort of awful thing, sort of stalked him, and then also sort of abandoned her kid? I will say the twist definitely took me places that I was not expecting, but I kind of loved how everything unfolded. I also felt that the romance felt kind of realistic despite the sort of like unbelievable plot. Trigger warnings for this book are basically gun violence, and I believe that's it. I also want to note that this series could be considered just a typical contemporary romance, but I think some of the themes in this book are a lot darker than other contemporary romances I've read. And it's like the book opens up with a shooting. I'm not sure that I would consider that like a warm, fluffy contemporary. So we're putting this in the dark romance category, especially with the ending of this book. Yeah. The last book on my list is The Siren by Tiffany Rice. Fuck your morality, your senses, and your feelings, because I have some dark erotica for you. The story follows famed dominatrix Nora, who's trying to escape her past and find a new passion, writing. While doing so, her life is irrevocably more complicated because it seems that Nora has never met a man that she didn't like. Case in point, Zach, the editor. He's pining for his estranged wife, but he does this sort of will he won't he thing with Nora the entire time that the book goes on. Don't worry, that's not the only shit she has to deal with. She also has to deal with the intrusive thoughts and actual presence of her former lover Siren, who she just can't seem to escape. There's lots of history in the first book, and there's not a whole lot of explanation on what their past is, but you're definitely intrigued and you're definitely not sure if you should trust him. And then, wait, there's more. Of course there's gonna be another love interest, and it is the guy that sort of like takes care of Nora, makes sure she's fed, makes sure she's taking care of herself, sort of plays a housekeeper and like nurturing role for her, even though he's much younger, and his name is Wesley. He lives in the house with Nora, and again, there's sort of a will they, won't they. He has this sort of tender crush on her, and she doesn't know whether or not she wants to fully corrupt him. It's complicated, all right? There is so much I could say about this book because I truly believe that it is a work of art. I think it could be analyzed in so many different ways, but I'm gonna get into the few reasons why I think you guys would like it. Number one, the morality makes this incredibly dark. When you get the flashbacks into Nora's past life, in the writing that she does and in her own head flashbacks to the time that she spent with Siren, you are so conflicted. Do we believe her? Do we trust Siren? Like, who do we know? Who do we love? You also don't know whether to hate or love Nora for trying to emotionally support her editor who's going through this really hard time. And then again, you also don't know if you want Nora to kind of take that step and end up with Wesley, who is this really sweet and supportive guy. And then at the end, you don't really know if you should trust your own judgment or not. And again, I think that makes this book inherently dark. It takes you places that I don't think other romances do. And it does it in such a caring and nuanced way that it had me literally craving the next book. In essence, the book is mind-blowing and is truly a favorite of mine. If you want to enter the dark underground world of BDSM and erotica, this is definitely a great place to start, especially if you tried to read 50 Shades of Grey and you thought it was all kind of like cheesy and stupid. For trigger warnings, I would say the only one that I can think of off the top of my head is potentially an appropriate age gap romance that was never consummated. And then this last book. don't want to say that I recommend it, but it is definitely a dark romance, and it is definitely something that I read and got something out of. And it is Pennies by Pepper Winters. This book is truly a train wreck that you cannot look away from. Basically, the book is about a girl named Pim who is kidnapped and sold into sexual slavery. This first book is about her experience in captivity. You get a first-person account into what it is like to be abused daily. If that is something that in any way sounds like it could be triggering to you, definitely don't pick this up. There is depiction of mental abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. At the end of this book, her body is literally broken and she will never recover. So yeah, it's not what I would call lighthearted. A lot of people are going to find the depiction of abuse in these 5 books as gratuitous. However, I felt so deeply for the character and I was so entranced by the writing that I definitely felt compelled to continue to read. And the way the narrative is written kind of makes it feel like a triumph of the human spirit in a way. And like I said, the whole time I was reading, I was on the edge of my seat wondering if this girl is gonna get saved. Also, I think it's interesting that it's not just the first book that is dark. She ends up getting saved in the first book, but we find out that her savior is not necessarily the pure and heroic guy that we would expect to be the savior of a girl from abuse. Like I said, this book and this series is definitely not for the faint of heart. I don't really want to say that I recommend it or that I enjoyed it, but it was a compelling and interesting read. I think if you read a lot of horror or you like books that deal deeply with psychology, I think this would be an interesting one to read. Trigger warning, like I said, for present tense, for rape, abuse, literally anything you could think of, it's gonna be in this book. And on that totally lighthearted note, those are all of my recommendations for my favorite dark romances. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books. Also, let me know your favorite dark romances and maybe I'll give them a try. I love you guys so much, and until next time.